Hey, welcome to another 10-minute talk with NonDoc. I'm Trace Savage, editor-in-chief, and I'm here today with Blake Douglas, our Edmond Civic Reporting Project leader, a great journalist who we want to talk with today about things going on in the city of Edmond. Blake, how are you?
I'm doing well, and I hope the citizens of Edmond are doing better.
Absolutely. You're rocking our new Newsy Koozie, right?
Mm-hmm.
Show that to folks. And if you're a donor to NonDoc, you have the option to get a coffee mug of note. Um, yeah, let's get right into it by talking about the political landscape in Edmond. It's currently today, December 17th, 2024. As the new year comes around, we'll be getting into one race for one position on the Edmond City Council. It was supposed to be three, but tell us what happened instead.
Well, the city council, as we've kind of gotten into, is going to be greatly revamped going into 2025. However, out of all of that upheaval, there will only be one election, which is for the mayoral race, which, as of today, is a race between four candidates. There will be three other new councilors joining the new mayor. However, one of those, Maggie Murdoch Nichols, was appointed after Tom Robbins, who is running for mayor, vacated his seat in November. And the other two races for Ward 3 and Ward 4 were won by default after only one candidate, Phil Frame, filed for Ward 4. And the what looked like a two-man race in Ward 3 ended after the challenger, Corey Winston, withdrew. So it's an interesting situation where we will have three councilors who will be representing the people of Edmond. However, none of them won a vote from the people of Edmond. So it'll be interesting to see, especially with some recent rhetoric from city government critics about how the city has handled some spending in the past, how constituents interact with them, how they engage, and if they give them perhaps a little less leeway than somebody who may have been elected.
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic. So there's five members of the Edmond City Council, and there's one journalist who is dedicated to covering the city of Edmond. You do some other things as well, but Blake, you joined our team about 6 months ago over the summer, and you succeeded Joe Tomlinson, who you knew and who started our Edmond Civic Reporting Project, which began in 2020 when we were concerned that the historic civic newspaper, the Edmond Sun, had closed in Edmond. Let's get back to the election coming up real quick. So you laid it out that Ward 1 Councilman Tom Robbins had to resign, is required of him to resign to run for mayor. They elect the mayor every 2 years in Edmond, which is kind of unusual. And so Mr. Robbins announced that he was going to run. He vacated Ward 1. There was a nomination or an application process. Maggie Murdoch Nichols was chosen by the rest of the council. And so she started her Ward 1 tenure. I guess her first meeting will be January 13th.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got Ward 3 and Ward 4, Kristen Mugg and Stacey Peterson, who did not run for reelection. And as you noted, only one person each was a candidate by the end of December 6th. One guy withdrew. And I want to kind of ask you a little bit about who is running for mayor, because now that sets up a situation where the mayor's race is the exclusive race in Edmond on February 11th.
Mm-hmm.
There's four candidates. And so in addition to Mr. Robbins, who else is running?
Well, we have David Hornbeek, who is a local architect, a longtime Edmond resident. He has been involved with projects like the First Americans Museum down in Oklahoma City. He had helped design that and get that along. He's been involved with arts at the University of Central Oklahoma. He's funded the Jazz Lab. And so folks around town know his name. There's also Mark Nash, who's been involved with the Edmond Alliance, local businessman. A lot of his, he also led opposition to the GO bond proposal that had failed in November. And finally, we have Leonard Scott, who many folks know, especially if they've watched Edmond City Council meetings over the years, as a local gadfly, a general critic of the current Edmond City Council, a former veteran published author who has indicated that in his press release announcing the campaign has indicated he's running as a placeholder until another candidate comes out and I assume takes on his policy position of
Yeah, I think his top policy positions include trying to make it easier to recall public officials in Edmond. I guess he wants to try to do that. And then he also, his big beef is that he wants the public comment period at council meetings to be moved to the beginning of the meeting, not the end of the meeting. Kind of an unusual thing to be so fired up about, but he is better known to folks around town as Old Ranger. We're hoping to have a debate between those four candidates, and we have them locked in for the evening of January 22nd. With that, public debates matter. We look forward to seeing you and working with partners to make that a reality. No matter who gets what vote total or percentage in the February 11th primary for Edmond, they have a bizarre rule where no matter what, the top two vote getters go to an April 1st general election. So even if one candidate got 65% of the vote in February, they would still take the top two. This created a bizarre scenario a few years ago when an individual who was deceased by the time the election came ended up appearing further on an April ballot. It's sort of an unusual part of Edmond's election code. And that brings us to another thing we wanted to talk about briefly, which is that Edmond has a requirement in its city charter that many believe is not constitutional anymore. And it was a requirement from the 1920s that said to hold public office in Edmond, you had to be a freeholder, which means a landowner. And you've done a couple stories looking at this. And you mentioned the Ward 3 race where Mr. Corey Winston filed for the seat. There was also somebody who filed or applied to be a Ward 1 council person who was not selected, but neither Mr. Winston nor that individual qualified as landowners and freeholders. Tell us a little bit more about this odd scenario and why some people think it needs to be changed.
Yeah. It initially came to public attention when Tom Robbins vacated his Ward 1 seat and the city released the qualifications for the candidates that they were looking for, and the freeholder one stuck out. I spoke with Representative Eric Harris a little bit after that, and we were talking about, hey, have you seen this? And he indicated that, yeah, it had piqued his interest. And as an attorney and sitting state rep, he was unsure if it was actually legal or constitutional. He'd indicated that, yeah, it's been around for a while, and that seems to have been the case, especially back in the early days of the United States, where being required to own land to even vote was pretty common. But before the turn of the 1800s, that had essentially gone away in a lot of cases.
And there's a lot of argument that it disenfranchises people certainly in a modern context, right? What percentage of Edmond is renters? I mean, is it a full third of the city? Or
yeah, that was the number that Derek Duncan, who had applied for one of the Ward 1 seats as a renter, had quoted. I know Mr. Corey Winston, I don't know if he indicated in his press release announcing his withdrawal if he had a number that he had used, but obviously he had come out and said, well, his run was intended to kind of bring attention to that and challenge it on behalf of all of the renters in Edmond, and especially in a city that has not built much affordable housing, many apartment complexes over the years. There are still renters there that contribute on the day to day, and it is odd to not be able to be eligible for public office without owning property in the modern context. That is strange, and I know at least one of the sitting city councilwomen who will be leaving office in May had indicated to me recently that when making the Ward 1 appointment, that was not something she considered, and she went as far as to say that she understood that was unconstitutional.
Yeah, there's some belief that the 1970 U.S. Supreme Court decision in Turner v. Fausch found, quote, the limitation of school board membership to freeholders violates the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. So, but then when you asked the city attorney for Edmond, she said, I don't know that I'm the one to determine whether that's enforceable or not. It's a paraphrase of the quote. So, when you put things out there on a website and say you have to be a landowner to apply for this appointment or to file for office, it has a chilling effect. And I think that one of the concerns people have is that only one person filed for Ward 4. Two people filed for Ward 3, one of whom did so largely because he felt like this needed to be a matter of public discussion. And generally speaking, the idea is that when more people are engaged in democracy as candidates, when there's fewer barriers to running for public office, you can have better results and better representation. Now, that's not taking anything away from the gentlemen who were just elected by default to Ward 3 and Ward 4. But to your point, the voters did not really get any sort of opportunity to make their voices heard or hear from candidates even. So one other thing you mentioned real quick, you talked about Edmond's general lack of affordable housing, and that's an issue that faces a lot of cities. But Edmond, a fairly affluent community in the central Oklahoma area, has not built an apartment complex in 12 years now, something of that nature. And then, again, housing continues to be an issue across the state. But the question is, well, if renters are dissuaded from holding office, who is in positions to vote on these questions? Who is this body reflective of the public in that regard? And so, as housing continues to be an issue worth examination, this sort of supposed qualification, even if it's not enforceable, you'd think that somebody in the city would say, well, we need to remove it from the charter so that when we announce, elections, that people aren't dissuaded from running for office.
And notably, the first time that we wrote a piece on it, at the time, Mr. Scott had not announced his candidacy for mayor, but at the time, all three of the mayoral candidates I spoke with had indicated, yeah, we don't believe that this should still be in the charter. This needs to be modernized with more of a simple residency requirement. I know Tom Robbins had put forward a proposal that, okay, there is a current residency requirement to ensure somebody who's running for office in Edmond actually lives there. I think right now the qualification would be, okay, you have to have lived here for a year before then. I think Tom Robbins indicated, okay, well, we can do away with the property ownership requirement, extend the residency requirement. So there are ways around that do not require you to properly own property.
Yeah, and Blake, you received a pretty amusing email regarding the freeholder requirement just today, right?
Just today, after the Edmond email newsletter had gone out, one of the folks who received that newsletter every Tuesday reached out to me, and he said, "Well, I don't own property in Edmond, but I do own a plot at Gracelawn Cemetery." So he was, joking out, should I run for Edmond City Council? So it has drawn some ire humorously and more seriously.
Yeah, that's pretty fascinating. You mentioned the Edmond email. If you're not already signed up for that and you live in Edmond, that's a great place to get original content that doesn't go anywhere else. Check that out at nondoc.com/newsletter. And then you will be up to speed on a lot of things going on as we get to the February 11th election. I believe the last day to register to vote. They must receive your application at the state election board by January 16th, January 17th, something like that. So you've got time to register if you just moved there. But yeah, like I said, follow along. Blake, you do a great job with this Edmond Civic Reporting Project, and great talking to you today about this election that you'll be covering.
Thank you.